Up on Book TV. And Coulter argues that immigration is the greatest issue facing the United States today and contends that America's immigration policy is deeply flawed. She's joined in conversation by Breitbart editor-at-large Ben Shapiro, who opens up the program with commentary on current presidential candidates.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for coming. It's wonderful to see you here at a special evening with Ann Coulter. Sorry for the slight delay in timing. There's, as you know, relocation from the Nixon Library here because of the size of the venue, and so we wanted to make sure that anybody who mistakenly went over to the Nixon Library got a map and got over here, and believe it or not, there have been a fair number of people who have done that, so we're giving it a little bit of extra time. In the meantime, you're going to have to listen to me talk a little bit because they pay me for that and you don't. So want to ask, let's do a quick straw poll, because those are fun and useless. So, let's go through a few candidates. Okay, how many hands for Jeb Bush? You can be honest, we won't stone you, it'll be all right. All right, nobody's that brave, okay. Okay, let's see the hands for Ted Cruz. Okay, it looks like about a quarter of the audience. Okay, how about Donald Trump? Okay, and I'll give you two more candidates, and I promise you we won't go all the way down the list because then we'll be 10 o'clock at night before we actually get here. I'm not going to ask about Jim Gilmore. Okay, how about Marco Rubio? Okay, fair number for Rubio. And Scott Walker, who announced today. Very interesting. Very interesting. There's a big crowd for Scott Walker. Walker obviously announces today, but it seems to me that obviously an odd amount of enthusiasm for Donald Trump. And it's odd in one sense, and it's obviously not odd in another. It's odd in the sense that Donald Trump is by no measure a conservative. If you look at his record, historically, he's not a conservative. Donald Trump 2 years ago was criticizing Mitt Romney for being too conservative on immigration. He was saying there needed to be a pathway to citizenship. Donald Trump a few years back was a pro-choice guy. Now he has flipped and he's become a pro-life guy. Donald Trump, we still don't know where he is on same-sex marriage. Donald Trump has proposed not just an income tax, he's actually proposed a wealth tax, which would mean that if you a 14% wealth tax, which means all of your assets, 14% would be gone. So if you have real estate holdings, you would actually have to liquidate your real estate holdings in order to pay his wealth tax. So Donald Trump is not a conservative, but there's this big outpouring of support for Donald Trump. And the reason that there's this big outpouring of support for Donald Trump is two reasons. Both of them are good. One is better than the other. The first reason, which is not so great, is because Donald Trump has been smacked by the left. And the way we on the right work is when somebody gets smacked by the left, we immediately go to, okay, this must be the greatest person who ever lived. Which explains both the love for Donald Trump and the continuing love for Sarah Palin. Palin says a lot of good things, she really does, but there's this kind of outsized support for Sarah Palin, largely because she was so unfairly attacked and maligned by the media, which I think everybody agrees with. And so everybody went, okay, we're with Sarah because the media hates her so much. That's an okay reason. It's not like a really spectacular reason. The real reason why people support Donald Trump, is because he is capturing the moral narrative in the country right now. Because when you watch Scott Walker, and I don't know how many folks here actually listened to or watched Scott Walker's announcement today. Show of hands, who actually saw it? Okay, so a few people, yeah, a fair number of people saw it. If you watch, I watched Scott Walker's announcement today. And when I watched Scott Walker's announcement today, it was very nice. I mean, it was all this stuff about his record and how he had broken the unions and how he had a vision for the country and how he was going to take on foreign policy. Very nice stump speech. He delivered it as well as Scott Walker can, which is, it was articulate. He's not a very fiery guy, so it's pretty even-keel delivery. And he did it without notes. I mean, it was impressive in that sense, a 45-minute speech without notes, unlike Trump without notes, who's actually coherent and actually had a linear structure to it. But there was one problem with what Scott Walker did. And you could tell the problem with what Scott Walker did when you listened to Hillary's speech this morning. Hillary gave a speech in New York at the News School. And in this speech, which was all about her economic plans, Hillary Clinton dropped one line about Scott Walker. She only dropped one line about Scott Walker. She dropped one about Rubio, one about Bush, and one about Walker. Those are the three she considers to be the front runners. And her line about Walker was kind of interesting. She said, Scott Walker wants to, I believe that the word that she used was something like squash the unions. Stomp, thank you. It was stomp the union, exactly. She used the word stomp. And then she suggested that it was mean-spirited. Right? That was her whole appeal. And her speech was about 40 minutes long and full of all these very obscure policy proposals about the continuing interest rates on income tax, all this stuff that nobody cares about and has ever heard of, the Buffett rule, which nobody understands or cares about. But the only thing that was designed to do was to elicit an emotional fear response in people who are members of the left. That's what it was designed to do. And this is what the entire left does. Right? This is what the entire left does about Trump, for example. Right? They say Donald Trump hates Hispanics, Donald Trump hates Latinos, and thus Donald Trump wants to hurt you. Right? This is what the Confederate flag debate was about. Who cares about the Confederate flag? No one cares about the Confederate flag. It hasn't been relevant in the country for at least 50 years, and before that for 100 years. I mean, the South lost the Civil War, news bulletin. Right? And the fact that this became a massive cause celeb among left, that's because what the left was attempting to do, and it's very clever, is white guy, white racist, shoots 9 black people in Charleston. The entire country says this is evil. White people should not shoot black people because it's racist and evil. And there's tremendous outpouring of support. Everybody is unified. And the left goes, we can't have that. Because if people realize that Americans actually get along with each other, that we're actually nice people, and we don't need the government to cow us into submission about all of this, then we won't vote for the left. So somehow they have to find a way of dividing people. And so the way that they divide people is specifically by going out of their way to find causes that they can then blame on people. So they couldn't go with, he's a Republican, because he wasn't, Dylan Stormroof. So instead they went with, he liked Confederate flags. That's not very strong, so what they went with after that was, he likes Confederate flags, and a lot of Republicans like Confederate flags, therefore Republicans secretly believe like this guy and want to shoot black folks. Right? This is the attenuated logic they use, and they use this with Trump also. Trump doesn't like illegal immigration, thus he hates Latinos and wants to kill Latinos. Well, I promise you, nothing Donald Trump has ever said murdered a 32-year-old woman in San Francisco. And what Donald Trump did that nobody else is picking up on, and this is something Republicans should, instead of just shaming Trump and pretending that he's unimportant, what Republicans should do, and I'll conclude with this and then we'll bring Ann over and get to the real star of the show, but what Republicans need to do is recognize that what Trump does and what he is so incredibly effective at in his own kind of brusque and rough way is Donald Trump says there is a villain to this story. There's a villain to this story. And we have to face down the villain to this story. There are bad guys and there are good guys, and you can either be on the side of the bad guys or you can be on the side of the good guys. And by doing that, he channels the anger that everybody feels, where we feel like, yes, there are bad guys and there are good guys. We're not all well-meaning people who just want what's best for the country. There are people in the country who want what's worst for the country. And because Trump says that, he generates a lot of sympathy for himself. And all the other Republicans don't have to agree with Donald Trump on anything or everything. But what they should do is they should recognize the power of what Trump is doing and the power of narrative in the battle, and they should pick up on that, and they should use it to their best advantage. Now, Ann's going to come over, and then we'll get started. So just a few more minutes, and we'll be ready to go. Thanks so much.
So you guys ready to go? All right, Ann's here. I'd like to bring back up Ben. Big round of applause for Ben Shapiro. Come on up here, Ben. And without further ado, let's please give a nice Orange County welcome to Miss Ann Coulter.
So this will be a rarity. I've both read the book and we can have a substantive talk about it. So this will...
That will be unusual for me.
I know. So why don't we jump right in, because I know that people have their own questions that they want to ask as well. So obviously, why don't I start with the question that my co-host asked you just the other week.
I'll strangle you like I tried to strangle him.
So my co-host asked you about the title of your book because that's what they do.
Liberals are utterly unimaginative. How many times are we going to have to, oh, but your title's so provocative. Yeah, that's what you do. You try to get people to read your books. And I'm thinking an interesting title works better than, in fact, I keep wanting to email Thomas Sowell, one of my heroes, and tell him, you got to let me come up with the titles for your books. You're my favorite writer, but this, you know, basic economics.
Well, the reason that I think that people are reacting to the book, obviously, is because we're in sort of a catch-22, and I want you to address this, and that is that the left refuses to talk about this topic until someone says something inflammatory, at which point they won't stop just yelling that people are saying inflammatory things instead of talking about the topic.
Right, it's very common.
So how exactly do we break through that?
Well, I think it's a worse catch-22 than that. I mean, we're in a pincher movement. If it were just the American people against the Democratic Party, we would win. If it were just Americans against the media, we could win. But it's the American people against the Democrats, against the businesses, against the Republicans. I mean, just to get this topic, immigration, talked about, it's nearly impossible. And I think people don't realize how much the media sets the agenda of what you even think about. We could go out to a bar right now and ask people, what's your position on what happened in Ferguson? What's your position on gay marriage? What's your position on global warming? They've all developed positions. They've thought about it. Immigration, well, I guess you folks in California have thought about it. But it's really interesting how much the media determines. These are the items we're allowed to talk about on today's menu. And no, you may not choose any items off the menu, which is why although apparently I called him a clown a few years ago, I am so happy to see Donald Trump in the race because, wow, he's changed the agenda. We're talking about immigration. Now, they're lying about immigration, but that's better than not talking about it at all.
So, speaking of Donald Trump, obviously he's gone, you know, he's had a big jump in the polls. You don't back Donald Trump for president.
Oh, I totally do.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
He got an advance copy of my book. He obviously read an advance copy of my book. And he said that at a private meeting Friday night. He was very generous. He said it was funny. He said his sister always tells him, you've written more books than you've read, Donald. And he told a crowd about this size, but I read Adios America, and all of you should too. So I thank him for that. I wish he'd mention it more on TV because I really think it would help him. I want people to read my book. I'm one of the few authors who writes her own books. I believe I am the only author who researches her own books. And it's shorter than it looks. It's fun. The chapters are short, and when you get toward the end, they're even shorter. There are 120 pages of footnotes, so it's way shorter than it looks, and you can totally read this book, so please read the book.
It is written in language, folks, that even Democrats can understand. And so let's start from the very beginning. You say that this is the greatest threat facing America, and I think this is a hard sell for a lot of even Republicans and conservatives who have been told that ISIS is the greatest threat, or Russia is the greatest threat, or taxation or social policy. Why is immigration the greatest threat facing the country?
Well, first of all, I'm assuming a lot of you are Republicans or conservative Democrats, and it feels like we have been overwhelmed with wave after wave of loss. Obama is elected. Obama is re-elected. There is Obamacare being upheld twice by the Supreme Court. Gay marriage foist on us. Obama withdraws our troops from Iraq. I am a ferocious supporter of the Iraq War, and I can't believe Obama comes in and gives away our victory. I mean, I hate him for that more than I hate him for Obamacare. None of this had to happen. It is all the result of Teddy Kennedy's 1965 Immigration Act. Without the 1965 Immigration Act, the post-1970 immigrants, very different from the pre-1970 immigrants. So I don't want to hear any weeping about your grandfathers. But we'll get back to that. The post-1970 immigrants are what got Obama elected in the first place. He could not have been elected without the post-1970 immigrants who have been voting 8-2 for the Democrats. Without the 1965 Immigration Act, Romney would have won a bigger victory against Obama than Reagan did against Carter in 1980. I think probably some of you were as surprised as I was the day at 3 a.m. election night. I thought he was going to win that. We'll get used to saying that a lot more. I thought we were going to win that election. What happened to that state? How did we get Obamacare? Well, Al Franken was the 51st vote for Obamacare. How did he win? Well, he cheated. But he wouldn't have been within shouting distance of cheating but for 100,000 Somalis now living in Minnesota, who were instructed by the first Muslim congressman, Keith Ellison, you must all vote for Al Franken. Without Obama as president, we wouldn't have Sonia Sotomayor. We wouldn't on the Supreme Court. We wouldn't have Elena Kagan on the Supreme Court. All these losses didn't have to happen. So whatever you think the most important issue is, It's not. I mean, even now, I get this sense, and from talking to people, you run into Democrats, and especially working class Democrats, saying, you know, I have had it. The Democrats have gone too far. This hysteria over, you know, taking down Confederate soldiers and changing the name of the Jefferson Monument and the fake rape cases and Obamacare and gay marriage. That's it. I'm voting Republican. Hellfire will rain down on these Democrats. Well, that might well happen, but Americans are about to be outvoted by other voters, by foreign voters the Democrats have brought in. Now, that's only talking about the political aspect, because I'm assuming this audience cares about the political aspect, and why should you care about this issue more than anything else, certainly if you're a Republican. But it's more than that. In order to bring in voters who will vote 8-2 for the Democrats, we're bringing in extremely primitive cultures, and this is most of what my book covers. In order to make it short and very readable, it's 100 pages of footnotes. It's way shorter than it looks. You got to read it. I ended up cutting 200 pages a month before we went to press. But what I wanted to keep in, and I thought it was important to keep in, were gang rape, child rape, incest rape. We are bringing in peasant cultures. It happens that Latin America is the peasant culture closest to us, but that's not the only one. Oh, no. These are very common behaviors, as are driving drunk and dumping your crap on the ground. I mean, it is changing our culture in ways that the rich don't experience. It's never coming to Nob Hill in San Francisco. It's probably not coming to Newport Beach. It's not coming to Park Avenue. No, they just get the cheap maids. While Americans are the ones bearing the cost, not only in terms of taxes, in their schools being overburdened, in massive, school lunch programs, the hospitals are going bankrupt. No, it's ordinary Americans who are paying the cost, and most of all, I would add here, are African Americans. I mean, has anybody in the media checked with, or as I've recently been instructed to stop saying African Americans, American blacks, because that is what I mean. I'm not talking about a guy whose father is a Kenyan. American blacks. And they're the ones who are coming up the socioeconomic ladder, who are just getting a foothold, who, most of all, whose jobs are just being wiped out. Have you seen the black teenage unemployment rate? Well, we have an obligation to our fellow Americans and our fellow Hispanic Americans who are also competing for those low-wage jobs. But the rich don't care about that. They want the cheap labor, they want you to pay for it, and they act like they're the ones speaking for Lupe the maid. Well, no, you're not speaking for Lupe the maid. Lupe would like her wage raised. Lupe apparently decided to immigrate to America and not to Honduras or Pakistan. Lupe wanted to live in America. I would like to live in America. But the elites don't. They want to live in Brazil, where there is a very, very rich upper crust, and the rest of us are their servants. And that is what you're seeing. You have seen since the deluge of these very peasant cultures on America in order to give the Democrats votes and the rich, cheap labor. You've seen a massive increase in income inequality. And which state has the most income inequality? You're in it. California. Which state has the least income inequality? Utah, one of the most monochromatic states. So, liberals pretend they care about income inequality. They pretend they care about the working class and raising the minimum wage. Here's an idea for raising the minimum wage. Stop dumping low-wage workers on the country. Then it will rise naturally through the laws of supply and demand, as it has in Australia and New Zealand.
So, there's a lot there, obviously. Do you want the David Brooks xenophobia question first? Or do you want the...
Sure, what's that? I never read David Brooks, so I'd be curious.
Well, that's why you're smarter than I am.
Nor does anyone else, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. David Brooks' only audience are the actual people at the New York Times who hire David Brooks. But David Brooks, over the weekend, he suggested that Donald Trump was using textbook xenophobia in order to drive out the vote, and suggested that any anti-immigrant rhetoric, essentially anti-illegal immigrant rhetoric, and talking about different cultures that are not as good as Western civilization would be xenophobia. How do you counter that? Or how should people in the audience counter that? Because we get this on a regular basis, obviously.
Well, I suppose I suppose if you're only talking about people who have no right to live here, yeah, you bet I'm Xena opposed. I'm not afraid of them. I think they're wrecking the country. But as I say, they're wrecking the country for the people already here. The racism question, which I talk about a lot in my book, no. The reason Americans are sensitive to the race issue particularly is because of the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. That's why we have civil rights laws. That's why we have affirmative action and set-asides. But then suddenly one day, out of the blue, people used to talk about integration all the time. It was integration. You don't discriminate against black people, which we had to spend 100 years teaching the Democrats not to do. But that is all about American blacks. It's not about someone who has never set foot in this country before. It's liberals who are the racists who say, oh, you're all brown, we're going to treat you like American blacks. And it's really kind of shocking. I mean, I don't know if maybe some of you know this. Jesse Jackson used to stand at the border denouncing the illegal immigrants coming across. Cesar Chavez denounced them as wetbacks, driving down the wages of the poor. But today, you can arrive from, the Sudan yesterday. You will get affirmative action applying to college. You will get affirmative action applying for government business loans. One of the tricks the cheap labor devotees pull when talking about, all the jobs being created by immigrants. Well, first I should start by saying, I've said this before, whenever it comes to immigration, it is always like the first line of Anna Karenina. The truth is always true in the same way. The lies are lies in their own ways. So you always have to look at the studies to see what the lie is. And one of the lies about how immigrants create so many jobs, that's based on how many small business loans they get from the federal government. Well, they get affirmative action for that. I mean, you're kind of chasing your tail here. And by the way, how many businesses of those were successful? But as for xenophobia, look, David, what's his name, Brooks? No, I get him confused with Brock. Look, he and the rest of the Manhattan elites and the farmers in need of cheap labor refusing to mechanize, no, they'll be I mean, there has to be a restriction at some point. They're xenophobic the same way any country is. How many people are there in the world? Like 5 billion?
7 billion? They're getting to close to 7 billion.
Okay, they'd all like to live here and collect welfare in America and have a nice life here. We're not taking them all, so at some point liberals are cutting them off too. They will cut them off as soon as every person they know who went to college, or at least one of the better colleges, has a maid, a nanny, a pool boy, a gardener. Once those needs are taken care of, okay, that's it. Sorry, Bangladesh, you're not coming in. So I'm just saying, how about we cut it off to help Americans already here now, the people who live here now.
So in your book, you talk a lot about also the demographics of winning in terms of conservatism. And you mentioned earlier how Romney would have obviously won an overwhelming victory if it hadn't been for the inundation of people of different populations who've been brought in by the 65 Act. Let me ask you from the Michael Medved perspective, because Michael takes the opposite perspective, and he and I have had this debate ourselves. Michael will argue that we have to do comprehensive immigration reform. We should be softer on the border. We should do all of this, and we should bring in more immigrants and find a pathway to citizenship, specifically because if we don't do this, then the Hispanic population in the United States is the fastest growing population, even just through natural growth and birth. What do we do in 20, 30 years to win elections as the white population of the United States, which historically votes Republican, decreases?
Well, a couple of things. I don't know how we could be any softer on the border. Perhaps we could fly them in directly from Central America. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Obama is doing that. He's doing that. We are flying them in so they don't have to go through that arduous journey through Mexico, handing them a voter's registration card. Point two, I mean, it is certainly the case right now that if 71% of Hispanics had voted Republican in the 2012 election, Mitt Romney still would have lost. If 4% more whites had voted Republican, Romney would have won. And the not analogy, but the point, I guess, I make in my book is to California in 1994. The demographics of the entire country are about what they were in California in 1994, when Pete Wilson won a huge come-from-behind victory by tying himself with titanium cords to Proposition 187, an anti-illegal immigration measure. Would have cut illegal immigrants off from getting any government services. That, and to go back to how mass immigration of low-skilled workers, not popular with black Americans. Proposition 187 won a majority of blacks, of whites, of Asians, 30% of Hispanics. Even people who were voting for the Democrat were voting for Proposition 187. Pete Wilson got 20% of the black vote that year. Across the country, he got, or the average among congressional Republicans was only 8%. So there's your path to victory, Republicans. And then you've got to shut it down, because point 3, well, okay, then we're just, I don't know, fiddling on the Titanic, because Hispanics don't care about amnesty. They're in.
Right.
They're already in. And of all the issues, we're not going to win the Hispanics. Also, this idea that there's some sort of Hispanic unity is something believed exclusively by white liberals and the RNC, apparently. Talk to your maids once in a while. No, the Dominicans hate the Puerto Ricans, the Mexicans hate the blacks. There is no unity here. The reason immigrants post-1970 have been voting overwhelmingly for the Democrats is because they're poor, they're in need of government services, they come from one-party states, they are used to block voting for a particular group. I mean, as I say, the People's Revolutionary Party of Mexico ruled Mexico for 71 years. Just, you know, tell me what the symbol is. I have to go vote for, and I'll go do it. The reason we have poor people voting for Democrats is because that's what they do. And it's not just poor people. I mean, and it's not just brown people. Look at Piers Morgan if you want to see how immigrants would vote. And by definition, any immigrant to America makes America more statist and less free, because we are the freest country in the world. I mean, it's like any immigrant to Finland makes Finland less white. It's just, you know, a definitional matter. And when people move, look at poor Vermont. It used to be rock-ribbed Republican Vermont. A bunch of New Yorkers moved up there, and now they have Bernie Sanders as a senator. A lot of states have flipped when New Yorkers have moved into them. Maybe we should build a fence around New York. No, you guys. But the point is, you always think, and yes, there are some immigrants who are coming and want to vote like an American, as I say in the book, who don't need 60 years of seeing what the Democrats do. They understand them right away. They start voting Republican right away. Glad to have you. That's 20% of them. Most of them are bringing their statist politics with them, and they're going to get more benefits under the Democrats than they will under Republicans. That is why they're voting for Democrats, not because we're mean about having a border.
So in your book, one of the things that you talk about at length, and I thought this was fascinating because I had no idea about this, and I'm pretty up on these things, is the complete lack of government statistics when it comes to illegal immigrant crime. Because you figure that should be a very easy thing to look up, and then in your book, as you detail, it's almost impossible to find any real government statistics on this stuff. Yes.
Well, this is one of the advantages of doing my own research, that this book wasn't going to be a book about immigration. I had a great idea for a book, which, by the way, I still think is a great idea for a book. And I'd written a couple of chapters, at least drafted them, and I get to my immigration chapter, and I go to look up, you know, basic obvious facts, how many immigrants are in prison. 2 weeks of looking, and I'm a fanatical researcher. The Census Department, the Department of Justice, the Bureau of Prisons, which has to be pretty good on these things because they have to keep the different gangs separated. So they really need to know. They have a reason to know. I look in the New York Times and Nexus, and has anybody argued about this? And everybody's arguing about wild guesses by the government. They refuse to tell us. And every time I come across a government report that seemed to be, this is what I mean about the first line of Anna Karenina, the truth is always the same. The lies are lies in their own ways. So